The Dogs of War are a complex faction, and as we discovered in my first video on them, the mechanics involved in bringing them truly to life in Total War Warhammer will have to be just as complex. The details don't end there though, because every other part of the faction will also require thought and rigorous balancing in order to get the very best out of them, and turn them into the power that so many people have been crying out for almost 6 years. One of the things that stands out most about this faction is just how many named characters they have. This isn't a seminal race like the Empire or the High Elves, yet they have a massive array of famous names that fans of the faction will want to see. Naturally, some of those fans are going to face some disappointment when a favourite is inevitably left on the cutting room floor, but I personally believe that not only will we see 2 to 4 legendary lords in the Dogs of War Race Pack DLC, but we'll also see a number of other characters added as legendary heroes, akin to Marcus Wolfhart's heroes in the Hunts Marshal's expedition. In this video we're going to be looking at the legendary characters who can serve as either lords or heroes for the Dogs of War. The difficulty comes in deciding who will slot into each role, because there are characters in this roster who could easily fit as both lord and hero. Due to this, I'm going to group these famous names together and suggest how I personally would employ them within the game. Borgio the Besieger is Prince of Miragliano and a legendary mercenary general renowned for his strategic ingenuity and the loyalty that he inspires in his men by joining them in even menial tasks far below his noble rank. He's also a poet and a cook, alongside being an exceptional warrior. His magical items are the monstrous mask helm, which would cause fear and possibly terror as well as increasing his armour. The Mace of Might, which was made of a cannonball which struck Borgio, but was simply embedded in his breastplate. He took this and had it made into a mace, regarding it as a talisman of good fortune, so this I'd expect to give him a melee buff and potentially additional ward save. And finally he has the Armour of Brazen Bronze, which is the armour that he was wearing when struck by that cannonball, and was forged from statues of deities that were dredged up from the blighted marshes beyond which lies Skaven Blight. I would expect this to give him an armour buff and additional missile resistance, as well as some potential buffs when fighting against Skaven. Frankly, Borgio is nailed on to be a lord. I see him being the main resident of Tilia on the map, starting in either his natural home of Miragliano or in Lucini with an early mission to retake that home from usurpers. Lucrezia Belladonna represents an ideal opportunity to add another compelling female character to the Total War Warhammer series, so I'd expect Creative Assembly to jump at the chance. She's a princess of the city of Pavona, which is near to Miragliano, and she was modelled on the stories that surrounded the famous Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander VI, also known as Rodrigo Borgia. Warhammer's Lucrezia is reputedly the most beautiful woman in the old world, and an expert poisoner and sorceress whose husbands have an unfortunate habit of dying shortly after they cease to be useful to her. Lucrezia did not have magical items on tabletop, but she did have 3 items of equipment. The Phial of Poison could give her the ability to poison a unit in battle, but given that the lore specifies that it takes effect the next day, I feel that this could be used for Lucrezia to eliminate an enemy hero or unit during pre-battle in a similar way to the forces of Slaanesh, only without having the hero/unit switch to her side. The Poison Stiletto would give her poison attacks, of course, and melee buffs, which would make a difference given that she should really be quite a poor melee fighter. And finally there's the Potion of Pavona, which provides battle buffs to either Lucrezia or a unit of her choosing. My suspicion is that CA would like to make her a faction leader, and that's understandable as she's an interesting character. However, personally I feel that she would be best represented as a legendary hero. Not only would her natural start position cram yet another legendary lord/lady into the mosh pit of the areas south and east of Athel Loren, which already features Ikit Claw, Belagar Ironhammer, the Fey Enchantress, Aranessa Saltspike, and if we have him in, Borgio the Besieger, but making her a hero instead would give the Dogs of War a powerful spellcaster on the battlefield, as well as an elite agent and assassin on the campaign map. Essentially what I'm saying is that I hope that Creative Assembly do not repeat the mistake that they made with Isabella von Karstein. With Marco Colombo, we leave the old world at last and strike out on an adventure in true Dogs of War fashion. Colombo is a famed explorer who would be based out of Lustria, probably replacing the New World Colonies faction near Hexoatl, as their presence has been essentially redundant since the addition of Marcus Wolfhart and the Hunts Marshal's expedition to the continent. That old and unplayable faction came with positive relations with lizardmen, which very much fits with the lore for Colombo, who brokered many deals with the children of the Old Ones, making himself rich and famous in the process, hence I'm confident about his replacing them. In addition to positive relations with the lizardmen, I expect him to have very poor relations with the Skaven, because most of his good relations with the lizardmen came about by helping them with their rat problem. His war gear consists of 4 items. The Gem of Lustria was part of his reward for serving the Slann as a mercenary, and I would see it giving him ward save. His Gourd of Lustrium wine is a very potent alcohol which boosts his strength. I would thus expect him to give him temporary melee buffs after being triggered, as well as potentially making him unbreakable for that time, bottled courage and all that. The Scroll of Araby gives temporary magical defense, so I would expect something like a time-limited ward save. And finally, the Navigator's Telescope gives him great range sight, so it would have benefits on both the campaign and battle maps, with extra line of sight on the campaign map, and maybe the ability to spot stalking units from further out in battle. I'm sure you've already figured out that he absolutely has to be a Lord, especially because he's the character who represents the clearest opportunity to get some dogs out of the old world. Next we have Lorenzo Lupo, the Prince of Lucini. He's an eccentric and an aesthete who collects fine art and artifacts. Contrary to his rank and title, he fights on foot at the front line alongside his men, earning their respect and unfailing loyalty accordingly, so he's a natural adventurer. His items are the Magical Shield of Myrmidia, which bears the symbol of a goddess of war and can dazzle attacking enemies, which would likely amount to a time-limited area of effect combat debuff for assailants. The Ring of Lucina gives area of effect morale buffs and could conceivably allow for temporary periods of unbreakability around a small area surrounding Lupo. Finally, there's the Sword of Lucan, which belonged to the founder of Lucini and would give Lupo a massive boost to his armor piercing damage. Lupo is best suited to being a lord, however there's a complication. Because of the proximity of Lucini and Miragliano, plus the fact that both cities are in the same province, I would expect that either he or Borgio the Besieger will be placed somewhere other than the Southern Realms, out on a campaign. And with Lupo's interest in art and ancient artifacts, a story around these could be employed whereby he's on a search for more of these treasured items. Leonardo Dimergliano is an inventor and engineer based heavily upon Leonardo da Vinci. He's an ingenious creator and craftsman, and I would see him giving substantial buffs to artillery and ranged weapons, while also potentially unlocking certain elite units, such as the steam tank, of which he was an inventor. His war gear consists of the Sphere of Alchemy, which is a short-range thrown explosive similar to a rudimentary grenade, the Prism of Power, which would drain enemy winds of magic akin to a Luminarch of Hysh, and the Compass of Meteoric Silver, which points him to the greatest concentration of magic on the battlefield. So in Total War Warhammer, I'd imagine it as a kind of time-limited magic regeneration booster. As much as he's an interesting character and would break the theme of skilled melee fighters among the male leaders of the Dogs of War, I would expect him to be a legendary hero and to be focused upon buffing units on the battlefield, as well as unlocking them on the campaign map once you've earned his services. Midas the Mean is a paymaster of great renown. His history is shrouded in secrecy, but rumours suggest that he may once have been a Sheikh of Araby who fled due to being suspected of embezzling money from his Sultan, and the Sultan was probably right. Heading to the pirate stronghold of Sartosa, Midas quickly made a name for himself as a skilled and ruthless paymaster who will defend the pay chest even in defeat. His legendary items are the Crest of Midas, which would provide area of effect buffs to troops on the battlefield, as well as likely ward save for Midas himself, and the Treasure Map, which is actually a Lizardman relic and will provide area of effect leadership buffs and possibly time-limited unbreakability and melee boosts. Midas himself could easily fit as a lord or hero, but I lean more towards the latter with him. I would expect him to provide battlefield buffs to morale and combat skills, given that the troops know that with Midas in charge of the money, the gold will flow. This would be in addition to campaign benefits to income, battle loot, reduced upkeep costs, all the good money stuff that you would expect an elite paymaster to bring to the table for you. Gazak Khan is a mighty hobgoblin warlord who has never been defeated in the open field of battle, and like other hobgoblins favours swift wolf-riding cavalry. He himself rides a giant wolf named Worgan, and is a hybrid melee and range lord, adept with both sword and bow. His legendary items are the Demon Head Helmet, which would provide regeneration, and the Red Scimitar, which is a weapon that would give strong armor piercing and magical damage buffs. Gazak is best suited to being a lord, as he's definitely a leader, not a follower, and has the benefit of being a natural fit for the Warhammer 3 map, as he hails from the Eastern Steppes, whereas other Dogs of War characters will require adaptation, or else be limited to inclusion in Immortal Empires. However, he could also be kept aside and used as part of a Hobgoblin Carnate DLC, so we might not see him in the Dogs of War at all, which would be a bit of a shame, as he would add a bit of colour and a different playstyle to the rest of the pack. If he does make it, expect to see him bringing very different armies to the battlefield compared to the others. Asarinal the Dragonlord is an elf of Calador and a hero of the famous Battle of Finuval Plain, who was exiled in disgrace by the Phoenix King for disobeying orders and instead leading an army of Calador to defend their homeland against a late Dark Elf attack. He rides Deathfang, a rare green dragon and one of the mightiest in the Warhammer world, and he wears the Amulet of Dragonheart, which would deliver area of effect combat debuffs to enemies when fighting him, as well as possibly giving him the ability to stalk. Asarinal is usually positioned as one of the regiments of renown, rather than a lord or hero, but given that he's a single name character on a powerful mount, I feel that he could as easily be used as a legendary hero. He's not really suited to being a lord though, as Asarinal is more of a fighter than a leader at this stage in the story. These are the main Lord and Hero choices available to the Dogs of War as a faction, and they make for a diverse and fun array of characters. Obviously all my suggested roles for them are simply my own preferences here, so I'm interested to know what you think. Would you send Borgio on campaign? Would you like Midas the Mean to lead an army? Or would you like them all to be stuffed into the Southern Realms to start and turn the south of the old world into Lustria Bowl 2 Electric Boogaloo? Stick your choices and hot takes in the comments section to keep the discussion going, and I'll be back soon for the final part of this series, in which we will look at the armies of the Dogs of War and their many, many, many regiments of renown. Subscribe so you're notified when that video comes out, and I'll see you there.